Now there was a red tree, our staff, which we had taken in passing from the gate of Toulon, and therefore we are called the Kcki people, or sons, said Gagavit and Zektakowa. The root of this, our staff, was pushed into the sand of the sea, and soon the sea was separated from the sand, and for this the red tree served, which we brought from Toulon. Soon the sand was as a line, and we passed out, and became wide above the sea and below the sea. Then all rejoiced when they saw sand in the sea. And many counseled together, there indeed is our hope. We must gather together on these first lands. Here only can we arrange ourselves since leaving Toulon. We're just, getting some of that. Annals of the Kcki. This is Forbidden Histories. We're connecting the Forbidden Histories. Getting that library, dig on it. This is the foundation. This is our foundation. Get that annals, man. We're going to get back into that in the Papal in a little bit, man, because we're connecting the Aztec, the Papal. All right. Get that Lost Tribes up, because we will be digging on that. Love to y'all, man. It's always fair use and they caboose bone. You know what I mean? It's always about research, teaching, and scholarship, and criticism. Let's go. Love to Miss D, man. She's digging on that promised land, the 3 Indias. We'll be digging on this in a little bit. The sisters breaking down the Spanish territory, the Mexican-American War, the Azteca, the Yudah, the Azteca. I love the AD, the etymology of Utah, the U.S. territory. You see it as Utah. That is your spelling. That is your spell. Break that vibration and get above the barrier. Because it's just coming from Utah, Y-U-T-A. And why take that Y out? Why leave just the U? Why put that T in there when they're just getting it from perhaps the Western Apache, Athabascan, Yudah? Then they take the D out and put a T, they drop the H, and then they take out the Y, put the U, put the H. First they take the H off, then they put the H on. Man, confusion. We're just talking Yudah. We're talking a territory of Yudah. Love to Isaac, man. Hit me with some drive, man. Another great map that had California. Like, it was 3 times the size of Texas. It was huge. So these territories, man, no matter, we're just trying to get to the root of what is here. So it's called all kind of ways, but we're getting, some very similar feels with the Sheba Solomon. These Davids, these Dewittes, these Kalelus, this Theodorus and Sylvanus, the Texas and Brabel, and so Solomon the builder, the connection of the Israelite kings here. And I tell you again, why did Columbus bring a Hebrew interpreter to Yudah? What was so important about these Yudah, Aztec Yudah? So when you see Aztec, they're just really calling it Yudah, tribe of Yudah. We're just talking the first lands. Soon the sand was as a line, and we passed out, and became wide above the sea and below the sea. Then all rejoiced when they saw sand in the sea, and that many counseled together, there indeed is our hope. We must gather together on these first lands. This red tree, this staff, the root of our staff was pushed into the sea, the sand of the sea, and soon the sea was separated from the sand. Right here. Does that have anything to do with the Yudah, Aztec, and the Yudah? In Yudah? And why is this author in the Forbidden Histories, saying that, hey, by them migrating away from that, they were migrating out of their lands. They must have been led by some other hijack that's leading them away from out of their lands. You know, so of course we're in the mind of a hijack. He's gonna be breaking down his Christus, his Hail Zeus, his Jesus Christ, wanting to, feel, oh yeah, these Aztecs were did human sacrifices, and they were in a state of humiliation. Remember that? Which is what? Captivity. So they got to make themselves feel good to introduce their God to your captivity. And in the name of their God, put you into further humiliation. We're going to dig on this wave and, see where this author wants us to surf and see, how it applies. It's all right. Because the drop is the drop. So, we can extract all that and see if we're getting any substance out of this particular part. We've gotten a lot out of this text. Let's see what we're going to get out of here. So we're just talking the Ark of the Covenant. Again, my sister Miss D, covered this greatly, and we're going to continue what she's bringing. So the people of whiteness, which of course is not their language, right? So what do you call whiteness? What do you call purity? What do you call righteousness? But these people are being connected to the land near 4,400 years ago from the Tower of Babel. These righteous people leaving Babylon. Now we got our Babylonian exilarchs popping up. These Israelite kings during this Babylonian captivity. The former were in fact of Hebrew origins. These Yudah, Aztec and Yudah, and likely the people of Lehi or Melech, according to the Mormon belief. All right, so again, you're in the mind of a hijack. Of the 7 tribes or families found in the record, it has been long suspected that those originally called the Aztec are people of Aztlan, Aztlan meaning whiteness or place of Hurons. I would have no doubt that long before this, they were called Nephites. These people were called Aztec long before they migrated south, and after the other families or tribes had left the 7 caves, they changed their name to Meshi-ka, Meshitan, in honor of their priest, Meshi, who guided them on their migration, whose name was Meshi. So we got some of this last time. Just, want to keep going a little bit in it. So later, after acquiring the land of Mexico, they would take the name Tinaka from Tenochtitlan, or prickly pear cactus. All 7 tribes originally came from Aztlan, but for some reason left. And as a result of this untold reason, they found themselves, according to the record, in humiliation. Perhaps they were cast out by others of their kind or were defeated by an enemy. Both are possible, and I would lean towards a curse upon their land, in which they knew they had brought upon themselves. Great changes in their land due to earthquakes diminishing the living waters that fed their land, making it a near paradise. Now, before this, the same author, was breaking down that all these major waterways just dried up, like, real quick, and these people had to migrate. Now, we're talking 2 different, migrations. It's not just one thing, you know what I'm saying? So we have a migration when we talk about the Anasazi. We're talking about the Yudah-Azteca. Then he goes back 4,400 years. 4,400 years. 4,400 years ago from the Tower of Babel. So you got this Babylonian situation, 4,000 years. Was it that long ago? I mean, he's throwing it out there. All right. So it is said in the Aztec record that the entire course of the migration from Aztlan to Mexico was near 400 years, and that these tribes occupied the caves near 200 to 300 years. Of the 400 years, the first tribe to leave the caves migrating south and eventually to Mexico was the Kcki, followed by the Kckas, then the Tinanex, and the Calhuas, and after them the Tlahuacas and Tlaxcalans. I'm butchering this stuff, man, but flow with me, man. The Aztec remained behind for a time as a result of a divine command given by their god, or what they thought was a god. So, here's what this author wants us to kind of go down this road of, that they were led by this, some hijack, and he has a name for this hijack, and he's saying he's finding it out of this Aztec record, if this hijack that must be leading them away from the promised land, because their promised land was Kalalus. Their promised land was this area in this four corners, but we're talking about multiple tribes. We're talking about multiple lands, multiple lots. Your promised land for your tribe is not necessarily the same promised land for another tribe. They have another lot designated for them. So a migration into this Yucatan and in South America doesn't have to be led by some hijack. But he wants us to follow that road that they were led by a hijack, away from the promised land, away from their Yudah, their Kalalus, their four corners, this area. Now we're trying to broaden our horizons because we know these people are drawing lines here. So who knows how big this was and how much this is and that is, you know what I'm saying? But, he's saying that they're getting out of their zone and being led by this sun worship situation. So does that play? Do we get into the sun worship when we talk about the Tenochtitlans and stuff like that? So were they led by some hijack into this other area, or were they, migrating for better pastures because of this famine that's hitting this land? Did they bring the famine on themselves? Is that, biblically or scripturally connecting to what we're getting from, this particular migration? Or are we talking about multiple migrations, not to get confused? Are we just saying that, this is the Exodus? Are we talking that migration? Are we talking migration after, thousands of years after this Exodus happened? You know what I'm saying? As this land is now drying up in the 900s and, 1000, whatever, at this timeline speaking. So I know we're talking multiple migrations, you know what I'm saying? It's just trying to get that clarity going on so that we can dig on this author as we're going through this Aztec migration. And what are we going to compare this to? What wave are we going to surf? So all these things play because we know that they were switched around. So was this Aztec migration referring to the Moses Exodus per se? Or is this Aztec migration happening way, way after the Moses migration? You know what I'm saying? Which is coming first? So we are talking Meshi, which gave us, this connection here. And that they then start calling themselves Meshi after this Meshi, which we know connects to this Mossack Meshi situation. That we're, connecting with a couple of docs, man. But right here, this Graham Hancock research doc says, what does the word Meshi mean? Aramaic language Phoenicians generally spoke Meshi-ka. The real word for Mesek means Messiah. Meshi. They put the S, they put the C, they put the S, they put the C. So whether it's the S or the C, we're just talking about their Messiah. And right here, they said they named it in honor of their priest and Lord. Their priest, their Messiah. Which, brings in the conversation. Are we talking Aztec? And when we talk Aztec, we're talking Aztec Yudah. We're talking tribe of Yudah. Migrating out of Yudah. And he's saying, well, why would they be migrating out of Yudah? Were they led by this hijack? And that's what he's going to get into now. I'm going to get this part, then I'm going to go to Ms. D in the copper color. But definitely, go into this and try to decipher, you know what I'm saying, with this, sun god that, they're bringing in, the human sacrifice, the sun god, they're following Satan. You know what I mean? But maybe we can extract something out of that too. So they're finding themselves in humiliation. Perhaps they were cast out by others of their kind or were defeated by an enemy. We're going to get into the Spaniard conquest. Both are possible, but I would lean towards a curse upon their land in which they knew they had brought upon themselves great change in their land due earthquakes diminishing the living waters that fed their land, making it a near paradise. After leaving Aslan, the tribe together found their way south to the place of grottos, the 7 caves or underground cities in which were long abandoned by the previous people who were the ancestors of those whom they would eventually join, the Toltec. It is said in the Aztec record that the entire course of migration from Aslan to Mexico was near 400 years, and that these tribes occupied the caves for 200 to 300 years of the 400. All right. So it's going to get into the Ark of the Covenant. Now, this author thinks that this Ark of the Covenant was a god that they were worshiping. And, hey, I wasn't there. I haven't seen this. I don't, we don't know. We don't know. But clearly, I think it's a lot of injection. Especially when he's bringing up Jesus the Christ. So we know we're coming from a perspective here, definitely of a hijack. But we're just talking, let's just get this last part before I get to my sister. These people held this God in reverence to the degree that no one but his keepers dared approach or touch it. It came concealed in a coffer of rushes so that none of the people had ever seen the form of their God. It is likely that this God was in fact the Ark of the Covenant or cheap memories. So what they're telling you is that these people had a, Ark of the Covenant. Now, whether they're calling it a, cheap this or fake this or Satan this or that this, that's what we're extracting out of this. So what are you saying, man? I hear what you're trying to put on it. These records you're talking about, the Aztec record tells that but he's not giving us the Aztec record, so we can't decipher that ourselves, right? We just have to take his word for it. But it says that, according to the Aztec record, the Aztec arrived in Mexico 300 years after the previously mentioned tribes. So this Yudah-Aztec, right? This Judah, right? This Judah. So let's just say it like that to see if that breaks any spell for us. So Judah arrived in Mexico 300 years after the other tribes. How does that sound? We're just talking Yudah. We're just talking Yudah, right? We're just talking Yudah. Yudah-Aztecan. All right. Judah arrived. Yudah arrived 300 years after the other tribe. In their travels in search of this promised land, their God kept promising them and was actually leading them from. So, again, this author feels like they were already there. But this author is not really, considering Peru, Jerusalem, all the tribes and the land and the Eden and all that in South America, everything that's connecting. So, there's a bigger perspective here. It's not just the 4 corners, right? It's not just that promised land. The whole thing has its promise, has its value, has its virtue. They found themselves somewhere north of Mexico. Before I expand upon its location, the Aztec record tells that when they left the caves, they took their principal god with them. All right, so here's when they're going to inject who's he saying their principal god is because of these records. But the Aztec, these people are not speaking for themselves. So here's somebody trying to decipher their records and tell us about it. And they put in this guy, Huitzilopochtli, something like that. All right. So he had 4 custodians with him. I did not know what this meant until later in the record explained that these 4 would carry this God on their shoulders. Any God that needs to be carried isn't a God. All right. So it sounds to me, all right, so then they're going to bring in Satan. All right, so now Satan had a good thing going back then, mimicking the true God. So this is when he brings in Satan and that they need to follow Jesus Christ. Now, they were in the promised land when they arrived on this continent some 1,500 years ago or prior. So he's saying that they were already there when they arrived. They were in their promised land. Now, no matter where it is and who he's trying to, say that they were following to give them a reason to bring in their Jesus of Christ, though, their Hail Zeus Krishna, to bring in that to this land. But, they must have been fooled or abandoned by some wicked God, because they were going the wrong way. Has this author proved that the promised land is not somewhere else in South America? or in some lands that were connected to South America. When they arrived on this continent some 1,500 years ago or prior, but their occupation upon the promised land or stewardship was conditional until the fulfillment. So they were given this land. They were rocking in their kalalus. They were rocking in their area, their Yudah. But it was conditional until fulfillment. In other words, you are welcome to the land and free to be here, but you will keep my laws and worship the one true and living God. Now up here he says, not realizing that they were already in the land which was promised to them in Aslan, and even prior to coming to Aslan, they likely did not understand that promise or fulfillment of covenant will not take place until the final gathering of Israel. That's where we stop. But he keeps going and says, when Jesus the Christ returned to rule. All right, so let's try it again. The promise and fulfillment of the covenant, which would not take place until the final gathering of all the tribes of Israel. All right. They were in the promised land when they arrived on this continent 1,500 years ago or prior, but their occupation upon the promised land or stewardship was conditional until the fulfillment. In other words, you are welcome to the land and free to be here. Here's your land, my people, but you will keep my laws. And here, worship the one and true and living. That's all Christian talk, but, rock your power. Call your mother, mother, your father, father. Don't be hijacked. Apparently, they had lost this knowledge, and now their pretend God was leading them from the promised land with false promises of a promised land. Is it customary that Satan mimics, the true and living God? All right. So if there's only one promised land, and that's in the four corners, then that might make sense. If we have a bigger perspective and know that these people are migrating, we're talking Moshi and we're talking Aztec. We're talking Aztec and we're talking Moshi. If they're migrating, they're doing an exodus, then they're going into another land. If we're talking, Anasazi, whatever you want to call other migrations, then they might be leaving a famine. Something might be happening to their land. The waters might be drying up, right? So it depends on what's going on. So if that's the curse on the land, then they are exiting out of that curse on the land. According to the script, we only went into this area called Egypt because of a famine happening in our land. So what's going on? What areas, we're trying to connect these things, as we know we've been switched around. So don't mind us. We don't know much. We know a little about a lot and a lot about a little. Our search is just beginning. All right, so on that, I want to get to the sister because she's going to bring out some great drop, continuing this Aztec drop, and then we'll get into some lost tribes and promised lands, man. Get our flutes rolling. Keep it going. My sister, Miss D, in the Copper Color Awakening. Y'all catch all four parts of this. She drops so much. Amazing and impactful, drop from the beginning. She puts her time into it. Love to her family, love to her son, the young king. All right, so we're picking up in part 3 because she highlighted some stuff that we did for the previous drop. So get that, and let's pick it up in part 3, man. Love to my sister, man. We love you. Let's go. Let me get from the top.
Mexico had lost 1/3 of its territory, including nearly.
Let's get it from right here.
Okay, check it.
Yeah.
Y'all see the map? Check this out. Y'all see everything in yellow? Y'all see everything in yellow right here? And right there? And all of that? Going into South America and the islands. You see that? Guess who territory that is? Spanish territory, G. Spanish. Can I get it? Spanish territory, right? Guess what? They even had the Louisiana Purchase, the Spanish territory, right? Guess what? You want to see the land they had in South America? This is going to flip you out. Flip you out. smaller map, so y'all gonna need to work with me, okay? Y'all see that? All the pink is the Spanish control, the Spanish land that they came over here and seized. You see Mexico, you see Peru, you see this, right? Now, each one of them got a number, right? That's the viceroy. It's the viceroy of New Spain is number 1. Number 2 is the viceroy of New Granada, Number 3 is the viceroy of New Castile. Number 4 is the viceroy of La Plata. Okay, and then number 5 is Portugal in Brazil, right? This piece right here is Portugal and Brazil. But look how much of the land they Spanish had possession of. Look at all the land they had. They had all the most highest land. Look at that. They had Peru. They had Mexico. They had the four corners.
Right. So, why would they do all that? No, it was, Mexico, Peru. Look at where they took down. When you look at that, you see it all lining up to your migration. You are the gold.
Check this out. They had Aslan. Check this out. They didn't get possession of the land till what? 18 something. The late 1800s, right? This is the map of Aztlan, right? This is the new map this is called the Nation of Aztlan map, right? The Mexican Reconquista. If you look the Reconquista up, right, it's going to show the Mexican people is looking now. They forming together to reconquer this land. They forging together to reconquer this land. The four corners. They want to reconquer. I'll show y'all again. They want to reconquer Wyoming, Utah, Nevada, California, Arizona, New Mexico, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, and in the Baja, California. They want all the land back. But check this out though, right? we about to go into when they lost the land. Check this out. Check this out, right? Because I know the Mexicans lost the land, right? Our people lost the land. So I'm like, it was a war that happened in the 1800s for them to lose that land. And guess what? It was called? It was called the Mexican-American War, right?
Hey.
Check this out. Check this out, y'all. Check this out, fam. Check this out. Okay. Check this out. It says the Mexican-American War in 1846 to 1848 marked the first U.S. armed conflict chiefly fought on foreign soil. It pitted a political divide in a military unprepared Mexico against the expansionist mind administration of U.S. President James Polk, who believed the U.S. had a manifest destiny, meaning it was they right by they God to come over here and do what they did to us. It was their right. You know what I'm saying? They God, Jesus Christ told them to come and do it. You know what I'm saying? Okay. Had manifest destiny to spread across the continent to the Pacific Ocean, right? When I read that, why the Pacific Ocean, right? Why the Pacific Ocean, right? A border skimmish along the Rio Grande, straight off the fighting and was followed by a series of U.S. victories. When the dust cleared, Mexico had lost about 1/3 of its territory. Okay, 1/3 of its territory. Mexico had lost 1/3 of its territory, including nearly all present-day California, Utah, Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico. Isn't it the map that I just showed you? Isn't that the map of Aztlan? Right? Check this out. Check this out.
Come on.
Thought that was a trick? Check this out.
Bring it out.
Check this out. Okay. Causes of the war. Okay. Texas gained its independence from Mexico in 1836. Okay, so Texas was originally part of Mexico. Okay, it says initially the United States declined to incorporate it into the Union, so they didn't want to incorporate Texas into the corporation. You know what I'm saying? Largely, why? Largely because northern political interests were against the addition of a new slave state. Okay? The Mexican government also encouraged border raids and warnings that any attention at annexation would lead to war. But why? Largely because northern political interests were against the addition of a new slave state. So Texas was going to be added as a slave state. Okay, as a slave state. That's crazy. Okay, check this out. We're gonna go down. Okay, we're gonna go down. Because I want to get to somebody. I want to get to somebody.
Yo, man, love to our sisters, man. You see that it's so passionate, man. Love to our mothers, man. Our mothers, man, want their seeds, man, to be royal, vibratory seeds again. Our mothers want their seeds to be nurtured, but how can it be nurtured in the mind of a hijack? Looking at the map of a hijack. So what this sister is doing, man, breaking this out, we're seeing that it's like, look, this is what was a strategic conquering. Look at these, look through the titles and see yourself. Mexican-American War is all about you, so-called Negro. All the wars that was going on here was all about these wars. You saw that drop, all those wars that up into the Korean War was all you. This ain't just no play. When we talk Yudah, what was it, war? What's that map, man? Y'all know what I'm talking about. Ame'rican War. Just say that war. We're gonna find it. Here we go. Gotta say it a certain way for this thing to communicate. I don't need to talk to you. I'm talking to Drop Nation. America has been at war 93% of the time. So the corporation is since 1776, right? After it was more against more, and these people were allowed and given treaties and given colonies, and they took that shit and went to war against the similar enemy of the melanated Moor that was already at war. The civil war for these lands, for this Kalelus, for these territories that was already taking place. Then enters these guys since 1776. And look at these wars and tell me you don't see yourself since they found you here, copper color race. As we get back into what the Spaniards had before this. Alright, so then come they in 1776, this corporation, American Revolutionary Wars, and all this stuff are against who? The Cherokee. The Cherokee. Chickamauga Wars, Pennamite, all this is all Cherokee, Indian, Northwest Indian. I'm going to keep scrolling. You tell me when to stop when you don't see a war about Indians. All the wars, Seminole. Every war that they had in the corporation of these United American Corporation, Cherokee Indian, Seminole, Texas Indian. Here comes my sister. Meshi-ka American War. Who are the Meshi? Who are the tribes of Moses? Who's this mixed multitude? Being led to your promised land. And why is every war, look, this is America. And you wonder why they still shoot you down in the street like you're just an Indian. Cowboys and Indians. I'm still going. I ain't stopped yet. I haven't gotten to a war that hasn't been against you until we have to get to the Philippine American, which was still niggas in the Philippines. Goodness gracious. I'm still in indigenous wars until I get to World War I in 1940. Now you think war is Afghanistan. You think war is Iraq. No, nigga, war is on you. War is on you. War is on you. The Cherokee. The Hebrew. Now what's this sister bringing out? What's this sister bringing out about this Mexican-American war? And pay attention to the territories.
Okay, when y'all go to this, if y'all go like 3 paragraphs down from where I was at, right? It says, meanwhile, U.S. troops led by General Winfield Scott landed in Veracruz and took over the city. It says they then began marching towards Mexico City, essentially following the same route Hernan Cortez followed when he invaded the Aztec Empire. The Mexicans resisted at Cerro Gordo and elsewhere, but were bested at each. In September 1847, Scott successfully laid siege to the Mexico City Chapultepec Castle. During the class, each group of military school cadets, the so-called Nisos, heroes, committed suicide rather than surrender, right? So this guy, this general, Winfield Scott, right? I wanted to look up Winfield Scott. No, I wanted to look up this battle at Mexico City. Okay. The battle of Chapultepec. Okay, y'all. The Battle of Chapultepec. It says, the Battle of Chapultepec in September 1847 was the battle between the invading U.S. Army and the Mexican forces holding Chapultepec in the Mexico City during the Mexican-American War as a part of the Battle of Fort Mexico City. The castle, sitting atop a 200-foot tall hill, was an important position for the defense of the city. Its capture paved the way for the fall of the Mexico City. Y'all hear that? So when the troops was able to take this city, take this castle that's set on a 200-foot hill, once they got this position, Mexico City was taken. You know what I'm saying? And Mr. Scott, General Scott, you know what I'm saying? He led them. Let's check him out. Real fast. Okay. Says Winfield Scott, okay, June 13, 1786, May 29, 1866, was a United States Army general and an unsuccessful presidential candidate, okay, for the Wing Party in 1852. Okay, he is known as Old Fuss and Feathers and the Grand Old Man of the Army. He served on active duty as the general longer than any other person in American history. Is rated one of the most senior commissioned officers of all times, and many historians rate him as the best American commander of his time. Y'all hear that bullshit? Over the course of his 53-year career, he commanded forces in the War of 1812, the Black Hawk War, the Mexican-American War, the Second Seminole War, and briefly the American Civil War, conceiving the Union strategy known as the Anaconda Plan that was used to defeat the Confederacy. Y'all hear that bull crap? This dude is known as the best commander ever. He is known and praised for killing us, killing our people strategically, strategy-wise. He got 53 years in. Look at how many wars he had with us. Man, come on, man. You want to know what the Anaconda Plan is, man? Come on, man. Let's check out what the Anaconda Plan is. You see this? Scott's Great Snake. You see this? This is his idea. You see that? Check this out. Anaconda Plan. Okay? Says the Anaconda Plan is the name applied to an outline strategy for suppressing the Confederacy at the beginning of the American Civil War, proposed by General-in-Chief Winfield Scott. The plan emphasized the Union blockade of the southern ports and called for an advance down the Mississippi River to cut the South in two. Because the blockade would be rather passive, it was widely derided by the vulturous fractions who wanted a more vigorously processions of war and who likened it to be the coil of an anaconda suffocating its victim. The snake's image caught on giving the proposal its proper name. Y'all see that? And what did it do? What did this do? Do y'all see that? Y'all see the picture? What did it do? It said it cut us off from the south. It not only cut us off from Mexico, but it also cut us off from the four corners. So it cut our armies off. It cut our families off from each other. They cut us in half. You know what I'm saying? They attacked on both ends. You know what I'm saying? Like, come on, man. It's crazy. Like, look. Like, talking about the three Indias, right? Three Indias, right? And I brought this up in a couple of videos before. I'm trying to find a PDF. I haven't been able to find it, but the medieval empire of the Israelites is really something for us to look into. You know, three Indias. You know, it really is. You know,
it's a great dig. Sticky fingers.
It really is.
The medieval empire of the Israelites.
Okay, I looked this word up, right? So, we're going to get the right pronunciation of the word.
Chapultepec.
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 Chapultepec. Chapultepec. Chapultepec. Okay, and what does it mean? Chapultepec, a hill, a grasshopper hill. And
Chapultepec.
A grasshopper hill. And the major part of Mexico, in the major part of Mexico City in Mexico, it is the ancient seat of the Aztec emperors, and it's surmounted by a castle that was captured by U.S. forces in September 1847. Now, that's crazy. Hold on.
I mean, it's so powerful, man, when you sit back and you have to at least get on the surfboard and just surf the wave of, if we're talking Aztec, just if Kendrick Lamar just called you an Israelite and ODB called you an Indian, and online etymology says Utah, this place that you've been like brainwashed not to think about, suddenly it's becoming kind of important, very important, when it's only and truly is you, dog. And this is a U.S. territory organized 1850. And you're like, all right, if I put all this together, I mean, we said they just got to California. Like, all this takedown was recent. The final leg of this takedown just happened. And it was a mastermind psychological plan. And it was a spell that was used, you know what I'm saying, from ancients of times. When you talk about Atlantis and Lemuria and all these sunken lands and these spells, man, these spellings, man, the possibilities when you can, give somebody a new way to spell, a new way to think, a new way to process. You give them a new chip, a new processor. And as that stuff gets, unraveled and we start to finally see through the, have glitches of our memory. We're just having glitches of memory for us to look up and say, huh? Yudah. 1850? U.S. territory organized? And all the wars since 1776 have been against me? A copper color race found here by the European wars. We're talking about the Seminole Wars. This sister was just bringing them out. The Seminole.
Hey, check this out, right?
Seminole.
I know y'all not gonna.
All right, let's go.
It, but, I'm just gonna read it to y'all. It says, from the early days of the Catholic Church, its bishop had the right of inquisition, the right to inquire on matters of faith and morals. The bishop had the power to try heretics for the matter of faith. Their authority included the power to administrate capital punishment to heretics, excommunication, and conduct the autos defeat. The church had taken the position that once a Catholic, always a Catholic. One could convert to Catholicism, but once a member of the faith, it was forbidden to leave the fold, shortly becoming the Aborigines Crusade. Okay? So, this is giving us some information. This is, if you want to check it out, it's called the Inquisition to the New World. That's what it's called. It's by Claire Steinberg Spritz. Okay. So it says that the Spanish throne divided its New World colonies into viceroys. The first division took place early in the 1600s. New Spain, with Mexico as its capital, and New Castile or Peru, with Lima as its capital, where the two new viceroys formed. New Spain consisted of what is not.
All right. I mean, I was getting into that, you know what I mean? But, man, love to the sister. Get all these parts, go surf all this wave, man. And the sisters is bringing so much of that indigenous, that raw, that uncut, that real spill, real spaloni, you know what I'm saying? So, love to you, sister, for that. And, man, we're going to keep it vibrating, man. We're going to keep it vibrating. So, I wanted to do a belly flop. I wanted to do a crazy belly flop. I wanted to get the dismount of this Lost Tribes and Promised Land, since we were always kind of, you know, bouncing around, you know what I'm saying, in certain areas. Because this is so much to get to. I just want to get the dismount. Let's see. I want to get the last chapter of this joint. Massacre now. Let's see. Island of Sable Venus? Woo, not yet. Sounds juicy. Man, what is that? Sable Venus. I still gotta get the Estevanico chapter, man. But I want to get this Slavery Comes to North America. Just to, you know, see how he dismounts this thing. As we're dealing with these conquistadors, right? We're dealing with these Spaniards. We're dealing with this invasion. Let's go. Let's get back in the mood and let's do it. Let's get back in the mood and let's do it. But just know they're just talking about you. But they're just talking about war in you. And war in you was war against Israel. These are not Indian wars. These are wars against Israel. This is the hijack, but it started with the Spaniards. They wanted the cities of gold, the 7 cities. We're talking the 7 cities. We're talking Yudah, in reference to living in the mountains. High, Yudah. Let's go. All right. The notorious sentence relayed to us by Captain John Smith from the journals of John Rolfe about the last of August 1619. All right. Pay attention to these dates. Came in a Dutch man of war that sold us 20 negars. has received more attention than it can answer to. And one of those questions most often raised about it has been, what precisely was the status of those 20 blacks? What's the status of those negars? Were they sold in Virginia as slaves, pure and simple, or was it much more common there at that time as indentured servants? Historians who have argued for their status as indentured servants have mainly been motivated by the desire to absolve the South of having plunged into a slave system single-handedly and without hesitation before any other English continental colonies even existed to collaborate in the guilty work. They can find strong circumstantial support for their argument that 20 blacks arrived more than 2 decades before we have any distinct signs that slavery was obtaining a foothold in Virginia. On the other hand, Jamestown also, as soon as it became entrenched and developed, tobacco as cash crop, had begun a large-scale importation of indentured labor of men and women bound by contract. The indented shape of perforations at which it was torn in 2 halves is what gave it its popular name, to serve for a limited period of years, usually around 5, that was to remain throughout the colonial period, almost as significant. All right, we're going to tie all this together. Almost as significant a means of obtaining workers in the South as the slave market was. Furthermore, in 1619, almost all of the buying and selling of labor in the colony was still being done by the Virginia Company rather than by private individuals. If this was the case with the 20 blacks, then isn't it more likely that they were the company's indentured servants rather than its slaves? But this question, though important, do not really deal with the problem of the genesis of slavery in North America, for there is one thing about which we can be fairly certain. Those 20 blacks had been a cargo of slaves while they were aboard the Dutch ship, and Virginia had nothing to do with this, no matter what they became when they stepped off the gangplank. The Negroes had arrived from the West Indies, according to all indications, as offerings of the international slave market. Offerings to their God. Offerings. They were offerings. But the fact that the Virginia colony was now dealing with this market does not have to be viewed as a sin of the future South manifesting itself early. It was rather an established sin of New World commerce accepted by Englishmen as far back as Sir John Hawkins, when there was no Virginia yet, and inevitably reaching the shores of another colony where labor was in demand. Virginia was the first Anglo-American colony to receive black slaves, not because it was the future South, but because it was the first Anglo-American colony. After all, Massachusetts Bay, the next English continental colony of major size, did not hesitate to enslave Pequots. We got to dig on that. He got a whole chapter on that. All right. And trade some of them for black slaves when the moment came to do so, as we know. Furthermore, it is fairly clear that there was black slavery in the colony well before then. Perhaps from the beginning, William Wood, writing his New England's Prospect in 1634, tells it an anecdote about a black Moor in the colony who was brought back to his master after a mishap in the woods. This is not likely to have been an indentured servant. A black Moor in the colony. Samuel Maverick of Chelsea was known by 1638 to have had Negro slaves for some years, and it is entirely possible that he, having arrived in the area as one of Sir Fernando Gorges's men in 1624, owned some of them even before the mass colonization began in 1630. These lone documented examples need not have been the only cases. In fact, for it is well known that some New England Puritan leaders had no objections to slavery. In principle, in 1645, Emmanuel Downing of Salem, wrote to his brother-in-law, John Winthrop, about new troubles that were then brewing with the Narragansetts. All right, go. If upon a just war the Lord should deliver them into our hands, we might easily have men, women, and children enough to exchange for Moors. We might have enough men, women, and children enough to exchange for Moors, which would be more gainful pillage for us than we conceive. For I do not see how we can thrive. Man, listen up. Until we get a stock of slaves sufficient to do all of our business, for our children's children will hardly see this great continent filled with people, so that our servants will still desire freedom to plant for themselves and not stay, but for great wages. And I suppose, is you putting this together yet? We talking America, we talking you. Stock of slaves sufficient to do our business, for our children's children will hardly see this great continent filled with people, so that our children will still desire freedom to plant for themselves. So that our servants will still desire freedom to plant for themselves. Aren't you only desiring the freedom to plant for yourself and not stay but for great wages? And I suppose you know very well how we shall maintain 20 Moors cheaper than one English servant. One could find no more vivid presentation of reasons why white planters preferred slaves over indentured servants. As for the preference for Moors over Narragansetts, colonists everywhere seemed convinced by now that Negroes were harder workers than Indians. And besides, it was inviting trouble to keep Indians captive too close to their native habitats. So when they captured you here, they knew it was trouble because you're too close to your habitat. They preferred you be out of your habitat. Colonists everywhere seemed convinced by now that the Negroes were harder workers than Indians. So are they referring to Negroes as, so-called African, so-called, and then you got the so-called Indian here, the Negro here. When they found you here, they knew that you preferred death over slavery, which is why you fought to the death, which is why you don't know who you are. And they were bringing over some, melanated fam from Africa over here because it was easier to enslave them on a different land. But those that were here, if they were caught, were prisoners of war. What war? the wars that have been going on 93% of the time since 1776. The war against the so-called Negro, the so-called Indian, found here, the copper color race found here, all this war. You preferred death, which is why you kept fighting. When did they have time to put you into slavery? So when they try to just pin your head like you're just some homeborn slave, you've been fighting. If you're the homeborn slave, who are these people fighting? Whose ancestors are these? These are not the so-called African ancestors fighting American wars, is it? No. These are the copper color races found here fighting your own war against you, your own invasion. This is you. This is you, dog. This is Utah. This is you, dog. This is Kalelus. These are the forbidden histories. Negroes were harder workers than the Indians. The ones that were bringing over were harder workers than the ones that were finding here. According to them, working for them, it wasn't that they were harder workers. It was that they were more willing to work for them. And besides, it was inviting trouble to keep these Negroes captive too close to their own native habitat. If in the long run, then New England proved far more resistant than the South to a mass influx of Negro slaves into the colonies, this was hardly owing to any superior moral scruples about slavery. James Truslow Adams had made the celebrated point that the difference was simply a matter of landscape and of the respective economies that the soil would yield in New England and in the South. This certainly is true to a large extent, but another factor besides physical geography may be found in the differing cultural geographies of North and South. As we have seen, the South in general, of which the American South was marginally and ambivalently a part, was less resistant to a racial, varied social environment than the North was. If one wants to judge the 17th century American South on its racial record, its relationship with the Indian should be considered alongside with that with the Negro. All right, so this relationship with the Indian should be considered alongside with the Negro. The Negro was badly treated everywhere and was being enslaved everywhere, but relations with the Indian in English America were nowhere so good, relatively speaking, as in Virginia, Maryland, and even the Carolinas after they were founded in the 1660s. It is to prove their hesitancy to become an aggressor against the Indian. Virginia fell victim to a second large-scale Indian attack in 1644. So in 1644, there was war. Now this is before this 1776. So these Indian wars, these people are just picking up these Indian wars. The Spaniards and the English were already dealing with these, you know what I'm saying, same so-called Negroes, these same tribes of Yudah that don't know who they are today, that think they're just some homeborn slaves brought over here on a boat. No, you were the ones that kept fighting, was at their throat, because you preferred death than the invasion. All right, let's go ahead. All right. Where we at? 16. So the Indian attack in 1644, before she at last resorted to some of the more conventional frontier behavior of Europeans, true offspring of George Percy and John Rolfe, Virginians like William Byrd and Westover could go right on into the 18th century advocating intermarriage between whites and Indians. All right. New England, on the other hand, was perfectly capable in 1640 of entertaining thoughts of having the Indians rooted out as being the cursed race of Ham. So just in case you didn't think they was talking about yo melanated ass, they're still trying to put you into the curse of Ham. They're not trying to put the Native American image today under the curse of Ham. They're putting Negroes under the curse of Ham. So when they say Negroes, you know, a lot of times they might be referring to those that were originally called Negroes coming off the boat rather than those that they were finding here. And they're just, you know, putting them in their titles of Indian and their statuses. I mean, this shit is straight up trickery, man. So Doctrine's hijack is an art form, man, and we got to be up for the task. This is a rare instance of that notion of racial taint being applied to the Indian. Racial taint with Ham, but more often such a notion applied to blacks for New Englanders too, among whom a certain kind of middle-class Protestantism descended from men like George Best was at home in a northern landscape and climate, was alien to the kind of extravagant blood that Samuel Sewall was to refer to in the 1700s. So you remember the Samuel Sewall selling to Joseph, man. Love to let us find the truth for that. It is significant that John Saffin, the Massachusetts slave owner against whom Sewall directed the anti-slavery polemic in which he used this term, really agreed with his opponent on what was perhaps the central issue. Saffin said he could accept the abolition of slavery in the colony, provided that the owners be reimbursed, and that the Negroes be all sent out the country, or else the remedy would be worse than the disease. And it is to be feared that those Negroes are free. If there be some strict course taken with them by authority, they will be a plague to this country. Because you're on their land. Yeah. So Southern plantation owner could have provided a clearer statement to show how an innate distaste for slavery among Anglo-Saxons was overcome by an even greater distaste for racial mingling. Indeed, one of the earliest North American slave laws on record was passed in Massachusetts in 1641, and it makes what is ultimately the same point, saying that there shall never be any bond slavery, villanage, or captivity amongst us, unless it be lawful captives taken in just wars, and such strangers as willingly sell themselves or are sold to us. So I see a loophole, don't you? One cannot keep one's own in perpetual servitude. Well, shit, not according to the dumb Diversas. I guess that's not their own. Neither according to the Old Testament nor to the English custom. But on the other hand, the Bible, Aristotle, and current international law all allowed the enslavement of strangers, which by now meant racial outsiders. So, whoa. So the Old Testament had a law against, putting your brothers into captivity. But now the Bible, the New Testament, gives a loophole to these racial outsiders. Massachusetts, 1641, Negroes and Indians. In other words, from the standpoint of Massachusetts General Court, 1641, it was permissible to enslave racial outsiders. This is how they're doing this shit in court, because it was against their law, but now they had a loophole. Now in 1641, it was permissible to enslave racial outsiders when they fell as captive laborers into your hands. And from the standpoint of John Saffin, 1701, it was more than desirable to keep them enslaved. But clearly, as far as descent, New Englanders of that era, like Samuel Sewall, were concerned, the best thing to do was not let them into your midst in the first place. And this above all in what New England was able to do relative to the South in no way superior to the latter on either the issue of slavery or that of race, New England was able to resist a large-scale influx of black slaves, partly out of the unreadiness, both moral and topographical, and basis to enter into the kind of cash crop economy that was conducive to such an influx, and partly out of the greater unwillingness to admit strangers for any reason whatsoever. In the South, on the other hand, once Virginia had made its choice for a tobacco economy, Maryland had followed suit after its founding in 1634, a choice deplored by such an outstanding Virginian as the historian Robert Beverly. As late as 1705, they had to go the way of the mass importation of cheap labor, a way that seems the whole variety of setting in which it presents itself in that era to have led all but the inexorably into a slave system, but a wow that could still mean enslaving Indians as well as blacks. Indians and blacks. You see this distinction, huh? And long run, even in the situations in which there was none of the moral qualms about enslaving Native Americans, that some settlers felt Indians simply were not available in the vast quantities that the market desired, and that the international trade in blacks was able to fulfill. But Robert Beverly's time, it was possible for him to predicate without qualifications that slaves are the Negroes, even though they were in fact still a few Indian slaves in the colonies, distinguishing them from servants who did not serve in perpetuity, and presumably all were white. Distinguished them from servants who did not serve in perpetuity, and presumably all were white. So they weren't perpetual slaves, perpetuity, they weren't perpetual slaves, and they presumably all were white. But for Beverly and for the New England contemporary Saffin and Sewall, there is an implied distaste for both sides of the equation, Negro and slave, a subtle condemnation of an entire alien complex that the white North American colonist has accepted into his body politic from Iberian hands, Spaniard hands. We're just talking Spain. We're just talking Spanish conquest. Sister Miss D in the Copper Color Awakening is bringing it out. That he considered unclean. Blackness and slavery both are synonymous of the infection. So the infection now considers you the infection. You see how they flip it. In the end, the South created a problem all its own by being an ambivalent culture, hanging indecisively between the sharply contrasting ones of the far north and the far south in the English New World. Too much like Jamaica in some respects, and too much like New England in others. Virginia, the country of John Rolfe, undoubtedly had its own votaries of Sable Venus, even as far back as the 17th century. So again, we got to get to that Sable Venus. But their influence sufficient to open wide the doors of the colony to a black presence was not to be the dominant one in the public morality. Throughout the 17th century in the South, it seems almost to be an element more or less West Indian in character, indeed specifically connected with the West Indies in the case of the Carolinas, that draws the main outlines of the society, but an element closer to the middle-class Protestant spirit of New England, indeed. So we got this connection, of course, between these, Caribbeans, these West Indies, with this, with the Carolinas. I mean, there was something I just watched, a documentary on the Americans, the Americans of Trinidad, and, the connection between those that were going from there to there, but they weren't coming from Africa. They were just coming from those islands there to these South America or North America situations. That draws the main outlines of the society, but an element closer to the middle class, Protestant New England. All right. The end of the process was a biracial society in which the great majority of whites, inclined to dislike blacks every bit as much as their New England counterparts were, loathed them all the more for fear of being engulfed by them. The slave codes were a frantic effort to turn all the extravagant blood into a scab. Extravagant blood into a scab. Yet there continued for a time to be men, largely anonymous, but a perceptible presence all the same, who resisted the inexorable pull of a slave system. We have almost nothing but scattered and often mystifying pieces of legislations, court rulings, and other legal documents by which to trace the emergence of that system in the South during the 17th century. But as many historians have rightly noticed, they are pervaded with a long-lasting indecisiveness as to the category of servitude in which blacks were to be placed. Clearly a lot of white masters who had paid good money for whites, just as white masters who had paid good money for whites, just as they had for Negroes. So we're talking white slaves and Negro slaves, black slaves. Love to Uno, you know what I mean, dropping that drop, man. You know what I'm saying? Hit us with this great drop that we're going to get to, you know what I'm saying, in the library. Where is it at? Yeah. We got to get there, man, because, you know, you see how it all plays. White slavery in the Barbary states. So a lot of them were already slaves of these Moors that were coming in. See? Okay. So we got the white slaves. Clearly a lot of white masters who had paid good money for whites, just as they had for Negroes, were releasing. Were releasing the latter after specified periods, just as they did the former. One could see then the same reluctance to make slavery an institution among Englishmen, whether of strangers or anyone else, as was manifested in 1652 by the Rhode Island legislator, still under the living influence of one of the most humane men of this time, Roger Williams, when it passed a law forbidding any black, mankind or white, to be held in servitude more than 10 years or beyond the age of 24 if they had been bought under 14 years of age. Slavery held on in Rhode Island as the same, but insignificantly. There even are instances to be found in early Virginia of free Negroes who had themselves become slaveholders, a privilege reluctantly according them, although they were forbidden to have white indentured servants. Undoubtedly, slave status was the most typical one for blacks even in the early years in Virginia and Maryland as in any other colony. But the final decision, summed up by Beverly's terse or something equation, was to be made only slowly and evidently over the resistance of some whites. A classic instance that appears to illustrate this situation is the case of John Punch, who occurred in Virginia in 1640. In that year, 3 servants, 2 of them white, 1 black, of a planter named Hugh Gwynn ran away and were caught. All 3 were given a whipping, but whereas the sentence handed out to the whites, Victor, a Dutchman, and the other a Scotchman named James Gregory, was an additional period of servitude beyond the term of their original contracts, the court ordered that the third, being a Negro named John Punch, shall serve his said masters or his assigned for the time of his natural life, here or elsewhere. It would seem that John Punch had been in for only a limited term of service prior to this offense, and that it was only when this opportunity offered itself that the white society reduced him to the condition of permanent servitude, in which the majority of blacks were undoubtedly to be found by then in Virginia. Permanent servitude, Diversas, 1452, Papal Bull, perpetual servitude. The case offers us an example of at least one of the ways in which the last obstacles of enslaving virtually the entire Negro serving population were overcome within the system of English law. But the question arises, how had John Punch, either himself a purchase from the international slave market, or the son of one, become an indentured servant rather than a slave in the first place? Obviously, a court ruling was required for Hugh Gwynn to make him unequivocally into the chattel slave that either he or a forebear surely once had been. This means either that Gwynn had been prepared to manumit him unto the court decided. Let me see that again. This means that either Gwynn had been prepared to manumit, kind of see what that is, him unto the court decided to prevent the entry of another frisky free Negro into the general society. Or what is more likely, that Gwynn had bought him from another planter who insisted that the contract of purchase stipulate only a limited term of servitude. In either case, we can see two opposing camps, one of whites who are ready or even eager to treat Negroes like Englishmen or Dutchmen or Scotchmen on the fundamental issue of personal liberty, the other of whites doing everything in their power to oppose this. So what do they know that they're hiding? That they're treating these Negroes like Englishmen, like Rooses, like Rosses, like the people in the High Scotlands, on the fundamental issue of personal freedom, liberty. The latter camp won because in the last analysis, race was the issue, not slavery. But the standpoint of the great majority of whites, those masters who manifested their dislike for the system of servitude by allowing some of the Negro element to flow free into the general society, were only making matters worse. Clearly, they were racially adventurous settlers in Virginia and Maryland, more than were likely to have been found in New England. But they were overwhelmed by others who were not prepared to tolerate anything like the racial commingling and sexual promiscuity. They often went together, as John Wolfe himself has suggested, that Spaniards and Barbadian planters went in for. Spaniards and Barbadians. For though the white settlers assuredly found that the free blacks in their midst irritating for many reasons, the main issue, as always when racism begins reaching its highest refinement, was sexual union and its consequences. The angriest of the scattered early documents involving blacks are always found on this point. In Virginia 1630, for example, a man named Hugh Davis was sentenced to be soundly whipped before an assembly of Negroes and others for abusing himself to the dishonor of God and the shame of Christians by defiling his body and lying with a Negro. Isn't that confusing? A man named Hugh Davis was sentenced to be soundly whipped before an assembly of Negroes by defiling his body by lying with a Negro. It has been suggested that the black partner here could have been a male. Alright, so though it is not likely, since outraged Christians in that day were willing to be quite explicit in describing any offense, so they would have said so. In any case, the court's emphasis seems to suggest that what was perverse about the act was its interracial aspect. This would also be the import of subsequent instances known to us in which fornication was punished with what seems to have been special vehemence. If it occurred between white and Negro, the matter was worse if the union produced a child. Resentment on this issue reached fruition in 1662, when Virginia passed a law that said in part, whereas some doubts have arisen whether children got by an Englishman upon a Negro woman should be slave or free, be it therefore enacted that all children born in this country shall be held bond or free, only according to the condition of the mother, and that the Christian children commit fornication with the Negro man, if any Christian shall commit fornication with a Negro man or woman, he or she so offending shall pay double fines imposed by the former act. We do have records, by the way, of the doubtless relatively infrequent cases of fornication between white women and black men, but there seem to have been marriages in this category. So most of the mixing was between the white men and the Negro women. Interesting. All right. All right. Yeah. Now, and let's take all that into the lost tribe discovered in New York. September 1644, a Portuguese Moreno named Antonio de Montesinos. You've heard this before in our quest. Arrived in Amsterdam after having lived for some years in South America and proceeded to tell the leaders of the recently established Jewish community, Israelite community, there a story that caused them to think of him as the latter-day Eldad the Danite. Some years in South America. Okay. So 2.5 years before, he told them while traveling in the wild mountains of Quito, he had heard some of his Indian guides remark that the natives of that country deserved all the suffering they had undergone at the hands of the Spaniards. We're just talking the Spaniards. The Spaniards that took down these Israelites. When he asked them to explain why they thought such a thing, they had replied mysteriously that it was because we so badly treated a holy people, the greatest in the world. So these people said, oh, okay, this is why it happened. So they're saying that it happened to them because they treated a people, a holy people, the greatest in the world. Nothing more had been offered by them on this point, but later in the same conversation, Francisco, one of the Indian guides, had declared that his countrymen would be avenged upon the Spaniards in time anyway, by means of a people now hidden. The two references apparently were to the same people, with Montesinos not seeing their full meaning in that moment, had put the whole matter out of his mind for the time being. Upon his return to Cartagena, the Judaizing Montesinos had found himself accused by the Inquisition and put in prison. Praying for salvation in his cell one day, he was reciting what was then a standard formula. Let's get a couple more. Among New World Morenos, blessed be the name of the Lord. who had not made me an idolater, a barbarian, a Negro, an Indian. When suddenly he stopped those Indians, he told himself, they are Hebrews. So this, so this Montezinos, you know what I'm saying? He's doing his little prayer for his salvation and saying, oh man, blessed be this Christos, man. It didn't make me no idolater, barbarian, no Negro. And then he stops and says, wait, those Indians are Hebrews. Pondering this thought incredulously, and yet with growing conviction, he resolved that if he ever was released, he would seek out the Indian Francisco and try to learn the truth. Montezino's story, unclear as to the circumstances of his incarceration, is equally unclear as to those of his release. But released he was, and he immediately went to Francisco, revealing himself as a Jew. Montezinos proclaimed his conviction that Francisco's hidden people were of the same race as he. Would Francisco lead him to them? The two men were soon back in the rugged mountains in which Francisco had made his initial revelation, marching relentlessly for a week before they finally came to a halt. It was a Saturday. Montezinos made a point of telling us they had come to a river larger than the Duero, and there echoes of the San Banyan in all of this. Are there echoes of the San Banyan in all of this? Remember the Prester John lived across from the San Banyan from the Israelite king. The San Banyan River that encircled the 10 tribes, and they couldn't cross it because it only stopped running on the Sabbath. And it was a river without water, but just stones, and it's a waterless river of sand and stones, precious stones. So this Montezinos makes a point of telling us that they had stopped, came to a halt on the Sabbath at the Sabbath river, the San Banyan, and all of this. Are there echoes of the San Banyan? Here, Francisco announced, is where your borders will be seen. Waving a banner high in the air, the Indian guide soon was greeted by a puff of smoke far beyond the other bank of the rivers. In response to the signal, the two men waited. Eventually, a canoe appeared bearing 3 men and a woman, all of them Indians. To the place where Francisco and Montezinos were standing at the water's edge, the woman got off and spoke to Francisco in an Indian tongue that Montezinos could not understand, although he could perceive that he was being identified in the conversation. She turned to her male companions to explain the situation. Upon hearing her words, they rose up, went over to Montezinos, and to his utter astonishment, said, Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Ehod. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Right? They had recited in Hebrew the fundamental credo of what he's saying, Judaism or Israelite culture. A brief conversation then ensued in their common ancestral tongue, according to Montezinos, whose fluency in it is almost as perplexing to the reader as his narrative, as is that of his 3 mysterious new companions. They told him they themselves were the tribe of Reuben. So this is going on around what, New York and New Amsterdam, and that the tribe of Joseph lived on an island nearby. The day when they were at last to issue forth into the world was coming soon, they explained, but in the meantime they could not allow visitors to cross over to them. They were wanting to make an exception in the near future, however.